let's face it, some exercises are just better than other exercises. Today we're going to talk about my top 10 exercises for building muscle all over your body. Let's talk about it. It's just a little bit harder. How did you make the harder than being Alright y'all, Simanga Michael Njapa, personal trainer and online coach. Welcome back to the channel. Please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and do that like thing and the notification thing so that you can get notifications every time I upload onto the channel. Today we're going to talk about my top 10 exercises for building muscle all over your body. We're going to start from the bottom and then we'll work our way up. So I mean calves, hamstrings, quads, all the way up. We're not going to talk about your neck, but all the way up to your back, chest, etc, etc. So right, let's get into it. Exercise number 1 for the calves for me will have to be some sort of leg press calf raise. And I say a leg press calf raise or a donkey calf raise because there's no load on the spine. And if you've ever done calf raises for a couple of years, I suppose, and gotten it enough in terms of strength with the calf raise, especially if you do the calf raise where you're standing, the standing calf raise especially, and you have all that weight on you, there is a point where it gets a bit uncomfortable sometimes. It also becomes more about core stabilization, so much to the point where you almost lose the fact that you need to focus on your calves and just plantar flexion of the calf muscles. So yeah, that's the only reason why I would put something like that ahead of the other standing calf raise, because stability wise you're sorted. You don't have to think about too many other things besides moving your ankles, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion of the ankles. So something like that, or and I haven't used this machine in a long time, but the donkey calf raise is also really great for that. So the load would be on your lower back or your hips, but not on your entire vertebra. So that's why something like that would be the best in my opinion for calves. Next, we have quads. And I know what you guys are thinking. I'm not gonna say it has to be some sort of squat version, of course, but it's gotta be a hack squat for me. Hack squat has gotta be number 1 for me. As to grass squats, full range of motion squats are close when it comes to building quads for me, but because of that stability component, and sometimes stability can be a limiting factor for some people, that's why something like a machine might just creep over something like that, but they're probably in and around the same, to be honest. But hack squat for me is really, really good. You can get nice and deep in there, in the hole, big stretch on the glutes, big stretch on the quads as well, and that's where the movement is the hardest as well, so it just lines up perfectly. And obviously when you do it, you want to be, your lower back is going to have nothing to worry about in terms of stabilization, in terms of load on it. You just have to focus on coming all the way down and then pushing through the heels and the outside of your foot and then coming all the way up again. And it should get easier as you come up and harder as you come down. So the hack squat for me is absolutely the number 1 exercise when it comes to building quads. In terms of putting muscle on your body, and obviously we're talking hamstrings now, I put an RDL there. And that might be a bit controversial, but a Romanian deadlift for me would just creep over something like a seated leg curl. And low-key, I would understand if someone put a seated leg curl just before this one. You know, it's fine. But personally, I like the RDL just a little bit more because we can load it. We can focus on our hips going back when we're doing that, and we can get a whole lot of stretch and a whole lot of tension, which you can still get with a seated leg curl, of course. But the only reason I would just edge the RDL is because we'll also get some glute activation, we'll also get some glute gains from it, and so it just activates a little bit more musculature in general than just doing a traditional seated leg curl. So that's the only reason why I would just put it in front of. So yeah, that's my take on that. Feel free to comment in the video and let me know if you think the seated leg curl wins over the the RDL, and that's okay. Next, we have the midsection. In the midsection, I'm talking abs. I'm not necessarily talking about core strength, about resisting different planes of motion and all that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about the abs themselves, the abdominal muscles. For me, I put a decline sit-up or a sit-up variation where you might have something like a pad underneath your back so that you also end up getting more of a stretch in your abs. Because too often when I see people training the abs, they just get the concentric part. I wouldn't even say they get it right, to be honest, but they just do the concentric part and they focus on the concentric too much and they don't focus on the eccentric and the stretching of the actual abdominal muscles. So with the decline, I'd kind of prescribe someone to obviously do it in a controlled way, try to use their legs as little as possible, because that's another thing that you see people use too much momentum. They use too much of leg drive when they're doing it and they're coming up. But also just try put like a little pad nyana behind you in your lower back, obviously within reason if you don't find this to be uncomfortable, so that you just get a little bit more of a stretch in your abdomen. So something like that would be really, really good. Obviously you can start out maybe on the floor, put a little thingy underneath your back, and then you can progress it to a point where you might be able to do a decline sit-up even with that little pad thingy behind your back. So that would be my number one go-to for abs. Next, how's it going? Anyways, next would be upper body. Now we're hitting the upper body, and one of the best upper body exercises in my opinion would be something like a dumbbell or a machine shoulder press or overhead press, whatever you want to call it. And again, this would just make it over something like a lateral raise, which to be honest is still on my list, but would just make it over that because of the amount of musculature it activates again. But some machines are better than others from what I've observed, but you want a machine or you want to do it with the dumbbells in such a way that you get as much of a stretch on the front delt as possible, and then you don't have to worry about stability demands too much. So you might want to be seated instead of standing, unless you're training for a different purpose and stability is part of the adaptation that you want to garner from the exercise. Then go for it. Then you can do something like a standing or a unilateral overhead press where you're standing. That's fine. But for building muscle, you need to be super stable so that you can generate as much force as you can and really tax the muscle that you're trying to work. More so than having something else being a limiting factor. So you want the muscle itself to be the limiting factor. So yeah, that's why a machine or a dumbbell seated press, something like that, an overhead press would be my number one go-to for shoulders, something like that. Please make sure you like the video. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give me one of those, hit the notification bell, do all those good YouTube things. I appreciate you guys watching the video. And now let's get into my last 5. Hey y'all, remember that starter pack program I told you guys about? Well, it's finally ready. So the starter pack program, just in case you might have missed it, is a program that I made for someone who's starting out in the gym, really doesn't know what to do. They want to gain muscle, they want to lose some sort of body fat, and they just really don't know how to go about the process. So that is an awesome program to just start you off and then send you in the right direction. So in that program, you'll find 40+ video library. There's a bunch of other resources that talk about meals, diets, supplementation, stretches, what stretches to do before, what stretches to do after, as well as voiceovers during the actual videos to tell you and cue you on how to do the movements properly. That thing is comprehensive, guys. I spent a long time doing it and preparing it. So it's, like I said, it's ready for you guys. So if you're ready to take your fitness to the next level and finally make that jump, be sure to comment in the video, starter, and I'll make sure I'll send it to you. Hey, chest. What you guys all this is what you guys came here for, chest. For the chest, again, it will be similar to the overhead press, where I would normally go for something like a dumbbell flat press. A dumbbell flat press where we can get as much range of motion as possible on the way down. Super big stretch, super amount of tension as well at the bottom. Most that I've used on, something's just lacking. Whether you can't go as far down as you want to, or it's just a little bit awkward in the shoulder, stuff like that. But because of the dumbbells being easy to manipulate, you can train either side unilaterally, but also at the same time, because You're doing them at the same time, but they're different in terms of them moving individually as well. So that is why I would put that one and make it my number one chest exercise. Again, simply because big stretch, lots of tension, but also the fact that your weaker side might come to light is also kind of a positive, because you have a chance to address certain muscle imbalances and maybe even shoulder girdle instabilities that you can be aware of and address because of you doing the actual dumbbell press. So yeah, that would be my number one chest exercise for growing as much musculature in the pecs as possible. This one I mentioned a little bit earlier. Again, sticking with shoulders and going back to shoulders, the cable lateral raise just has to be in there for me. It has to. Low-key, a part of me even feels like even if you left the shoulder press out, because you get some of that horizontal pressing and that front delt gets some of that action there, you can't afford to leave cable lateral raise out. Some sort of lateral raise variation, but obviously the cable lateral raise would make it just before something like a dumbbell, because in that stretch position we can still get a lot of tension, which is an essential ingredient when it comes to building as much muscle as you can, because you wanna optimize for that as well. You wanna be super stable, big stretch, big tension in the stretch, and then that's why, like I said, cable lateral raise just has to be in there for me. Next, we're talking back. No, not a deadlift, not a pull down. For me, I'm going for a classic T-bar row with this one. You can I'd say your elbow position might want to be in and around the middle, so like about 45 degrees, not necessarily all the way flared out, but also not tucked in either. So in and around the middle, where you can kind of get a little bit of everything. That if that had to be the only exercise you do for your back, you still have a pretty decent back. Again, you'd want to come down as much as you can, chest on the pad, open up your shoulder blades as much as you can, close them, and then focus on your elbows coming up as much as you can, and then squeeze those shoulder blades back there. So that just has to be that. There's very few exercises that I can think of that stimulate your back and allow it to move, give the amount of stretch and tension that it needs in the stretch position, like a T-bar row. So T-bar rows are absolutely awesome. Some people do find them a bit uncomfortable, especially near the end of the rep where they almost can't breathe and the pad is like really pressing up against them. It's not a case of if you don't do a T-bar row, you're not going to build any muscle in your back. But for me, that is one of the best exercises when it comes to building back strength and back thickness. Righty, exercise number 9, we're nearing the end of our list. And this has to be, the last two are for arms, triceps and biceps, that's all that's left. And you guys have any guesses? No? Okay. So for triceps, I'll have to have some sort of overhead variation, because if you've ever done an overhead variation versus a variation where your arms are by your sides and you're pressing down and you're contracting your tricep, it's really just not the same ball game. And like I've mentioned on several videos, and even in this video a little bit, we want to get as much of a stretch as we can and as much tension in the stretch position. And you can even feel it when you do it yourself, when you're doing that, the normal press down or push down versus one of those, the stretch is just different. And so I would have to make sure that an overhead tricep extension is in there. With these, I prefer to perform these with a rope. Some people might prefer a straight bar, as long as it's not limiting you in terms of how much power output and how many reps you can do. That's fine. You might want to do some sort of like a split stance, core is really tight, or you might want to have like a bench kind of situation and then do it and have a cable set up behind you. Something of that sort, but that just has to be my number one when it comes to tricep growth. And also because it just activates a lot of the heads of the triceps, and even more so biases the head. I think it's the long head, if I'm not being mistaken. The biggest head of the triceps. So it just has to be. The press down is great, and I love the press down. And it's one of the easier moves to teach people. But this one is just a little bit better. Okay, last and certainly not least, we have the Bayesian curl, or some sort of cable curl variation. With this one, normally I try to have, and I see people normally doing this where they'll face, like let's say if the camera is where it is right now and the machine or the pulley system is where it is, and then I do these towards the pulley system. I tend to prefer facing away from the pulley system so that you can have that stretch and your arm moving towards the pulley system as you stretch your biceps. That way you can get more of a stretch, and then it should get easier as you come up, but it should be super hard at the bottom. I'll see if I can put something like that there. But a Bayesian curl is very similar to that. People do have different variations, like Menno Henselmans. Menno, I'm just gonna say Menno just so I don't mess up his surname, shame. But yeah, like a lot of tension, a lot of stretch, or a lot of tension in the stretch position is again gonna be super critical for making sure that the exercise is optimized in order to achieve the goal of hypertrophy. So that, in a nutshell, is my top 10. You guys feel free to let me know what you think. Feel free to let me know if you disagree or you agree, you think I'm awesome, you don't think I'm awesome, that is okay. Thank you so much for watching the video. I will be back soon. Thank you so much, guys. Make sure you do the YouTube stuff again. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.